The kerosene lamp flickered, casting shadows that danced like devils in the small seamstress shop. Outside, the Colorado wind didn't just howl, it screamed. Amaya Gable, an orphan who knew how to make herself small, was finishing a silk cuff for a dress she could never afford. And that's when the door crashed open. It wasn't the wind. It was a man. A broken, bleeding heap of leather and denim who collapsed on her clean pine floor, staining it crimson. He was a ranger, though she didn't know it. He was dying. And the men who shot him, they were still out there. She was an orphan seamstress who mended clothes. He was a broken man who mended nothing. She saved his life with a needle and thread. But in the Wild West, no good deed goes unpunished. The town of Creedwater Gulch was a speck of defiant humanity, carved into the unforgiving jaw of the San Juan Mountains. It was a place of high hopes and shallow graves, and Amaya Gable at 23 understood the latter better than the former. Her shop, Gable's Fine Mending and Dressmaking, was a narrow sliver of a building pressed between the roaring saloon and the quiet assayer's office. It was her inheritance, purchased with the last of the meager funds her parents had left after the influenza took them on the Oregon Trail, leaving her to be raised by a stern Presbyterian aunt who died 3 years prior. Amaya was a creature of routine. She rose before the sun swept the boardwalk in front of her shop, and by the time the first rays hit the dusty street, she was already at her bench. Her fingers stained with ink from tracing patterns and pricked by 1,000 needlepoints were her only true companions. She was the town's invisible woman. They saw her work, the fine stitching on Mayor Sterling's wife's gowns, the sturdy patches on the miner's canvas. But they rarely saw her. She was an orphan, and the West was not kind to the unattached. This particular evening in late October, a storm was brewing. It wasn't a clean, refreshing rain. It was a dry, violent squall, spitting dust and rage. The wind hit the windows of her small shop like a fist rattling the glass. Amaya lit her best kerosene lamp, the one with the brass base, and pulled the heavy curtain across the front window. She was working on a challenging piece, a wedding gown for Lucy Sterling, the mayor's daughter. It was made of fine Brussels lace, ordered special from a W. Putnam Company catalogue. A sudden splintering crash from the street made her flinch, dropping her silver thimble. It rolled across the floor. She held her breath, listening. The saloon was rowdy tonight, payday. Probably just a drunk falling off the boardwalk. She let out her breath and bent to retrieve the thimble. Crash. This time it was her own door. It flew open with such violence that it slammed against the wall, knocking a spool of red thread to the floor. Amaya screamed, scrambling backward and grabbing the heaviest thing she could find, her tailor's shears, heavy and cold. The storm howled into the room, extinguishing her lamp, plunging the shop into the terrifying grey light of dusk. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, a massive, shapeless thing. It took 2 steps forward, away from the screaming wind, and then collapsed. It wasn't a fall. It was a complete, boneless collapse like a sack of grain cut open. Silence. The wind noise was cut in half as the door pushed by. A gust swung slowly, agonizingly closed, clicking shut with a terrifying finality. Amaya was alone in the dark with it. Her heart was a hummingbird in her throat. She fumbled on her bench for the box of lucifer matches. Her hands shook so violently it took 3 tries. The match scraped flared, and she held it high. The man on her floor was drowning in his own blood. He was sprawled on his stomach, a dark, viscous pool spreading rapidly across her freshly swept pine floor. He was large, dressed in a mud-caked duster, heavy denim and worn leather boots. A ranger's star was pinned to his vest, but it was so caked in grime and blood she almost missed it. His gun belt was still strapped to his waist, the holster empty, save for the faint outline of a Remington. He groaned a low animal sound of pure agony. Emiya was a practical woman. She knew what this meant. Whoever had done this to him, they might be looking to finish the job. Her first instinct, the one that had kept her alive as an orphan, was to run. Get the sheriff. Hide. But the man groaned again, and it was the sound of a trapped thing. She took a step closer, holding the lit match. She lit the lamp again, her hands now steady. The return of the warm light was a small comfort. She knelt beside him, the shears still clutched in her hand. Mister, can you hear me?" He didn't respond. His breathing was a wet, shallow rattle. He was shot, and shot badly. She could smell the iron tang of the blood and the sharp, acidic scent of gunpowder. She had to make a choice. If she left him, he would die here on her floor. If she helped him, his trouble would become her trouble. She looked at the Brussels lace, gleaming like a ghost in the corner. Then she looked at the blood spreading toward it. "Damn it," she whispered. With a strength born of pure adrenaline, she grabbed the back of his duster and pulled. He was impossibly heavy. She strained, grunting, and managed to roll him over onto his back. His face was a mask of dirt, beard, stubble, and pain. He was younger than she'd thought, perhaps 30. A deep crease was carved between his brows. His eyes were closed, his face pale as ash. She saw the wound. It was high on his left shoulder, near the collarbone, but it was the exit wound in his back which she'd seen first. That was the problem. The bullet had gone clean through, but it had taken a lot with it. "All right, Ranger," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You've bled all over my floor. The least you can do is not die on it." She ran to the door, her fear forgotten, replaced by a sudden, fierce resolve. She shot the heavy iron bolt across the door. She pulled the thickest curtain, the one for her fitting room, and jammed it against the bottom. Then she turned back to the man. She ripped a bolt of clean muslin meant for a child's christening gown and pressed it hard against the wound in his back. He screamed, a muffled, horrifying sound, and his eyes shot open. They were blue. Not a calm blue, but a furious, icy blue like a winter lake. He stared at her not with gratitude, but with pure, feral confusion. "Hold still!" she commanded, her voice sharper than she intended. "You're bleeding out." His eyes rolled back, and he was gone again. Emiya Gable, the orphan seamstress, took a deep breath. She had her tailor's shears, her needles, and a spool of thick, waxed linen thread, and she was about to perform a different kind of tailoring. The shop was no longer a place of quiet creation. It was a field hospital. The air, usually fragrant with the smell of sizing soap and tea, was now thick with the copper and salt smell of blood. Josiah Monroe, though Emiya didn't know his name, was dying. The muslin was soaked in seconds. "No, no, no," she chanted, pressing down harder. She had to stop the bleeding, but she also had to clean the wound. Her aunt, a woman of grim practicality, had taught her some basic remedies. "The difference between a wound and a grave," her aunt used to say, "is a bottle of whiskey and a hot fire." Emiya didn't have a fire, but she had a pot-bellied stove. She dashed to the back room, her small living quarters, and threw kindling into it. She lit it with a trembling hand, then grabbed the one bottle of cheap whiskey she kept for medicinal purposes. She also grabbed her largest sewing needle, a curved upholstery needle, and her finest, strongest silk thread. She returned to the man. He was shivering, his body slick with a cold sweat. Infection was setting in, or shock, or both. "This is going to hurt," she said, more to herself than to him. She unbuttoned his blood-caked vest and shirt, her fingers recoiling from the wet, sticky fabric. She had to cut the shirt away. As she did, she saw the ruined landscape of his torso, Old scars crisscrossed his ribs, white and puckered. This was not the first time he'd been shot. But this wound was angry. The entry point on his shoulder was a puckered, dark hole. The exit wound on his back was a ragged tear. "Need to clean it," she mumbled. She took a breath and poured the whiskey directly into the wound. Josiah Monroe left the ground. He roared a sound that shook the glass jars on her shelves. His back arched, his hands clawed at the floor, and his ice-blue eyes snapped open, blazing, with an agony so profound it stole her to breath. I'm sorry," she cried, pushing him back down. "It's to stop the rot." He collapsed back, breathing in great ragged gasps. He was lucid now for a moment, his eyes fixed on her. "Who?" he rasped. "Emiah Gable. Now shut up, you're bleeding." She worked with a focused, desperate energy. She boiled water on the stove, sterilized her needle and shears in the flame, and set about cleaning the wound as best she knew. The bullet had passed through, which was a mercy, but it had left fragments of his shirt, and who knew what else inside. As she worked, probing the wound with tweezers sterilized in whiskey, he began to drift. He was burning up with fever, his skin radiating a dry heat, and he began to talk. Not to her, to someone else. Anna, shouldn't have left. He muttered, his head thrashing on the folded canvas she'd put under his head. It's all my damn fault. Emiah froze. Anna, a wife, a sweetheart. The Blackwood gang. He breathed, his voice a ghost. Thorne, Ethan Thorne. I'll see you. In hell. His confession, delirium fueled, painted a picture of a man haunted by more than just this new wound. She had to stitch him. It was the only way. Her hands, so used to the delicate work of lace and silk, were now faced with human flesh. She took her upholstery needle and the silk thread. "Lord, forgive me," she whispered, and took the first stitch. He didn't scream this time. He just whimpered a lost, broken sound. She stitched the exit wound, first pulling the torn edges of his back together with the same precise, tiny stitches she would use on a gentleman's coat. It was gruesome, but her focus was absolute. This was mending. This was what she did. She was mending a man. Just as she was tying the final knot, a sharp, imperious knock rattled the front door. Knock, knock, knock. Emia's heart stopped her. She looked at the bolted door, then at the man on the floor, then at her own blood-soaked apron. "Miss Gable, Emia, are you in there?" It was the voice of Mrs. Agatha Peabody, the town's self-appointed moral guardian and chief gossip. She was a client. A very important client. "One moment, Mrs. Peabody." Emia called out, her voice a squeak. She frantically looked around. The man. The blood. She couldn't hide him. She grabbed a heavy wool blanket, one she kept for winter, and threw it over him. It was a lumpy, conspicuous and breathing pile in the middle of her floor. "Emia, I saw your light on. I need to talk to you about the hem on my Sunday dress. It is simply—" The knocking became more insistent. I am indisposed, Mrs. Peabody." Emia called, trying to scrub the blood from her hands in a basin of water. The water turned pink. "Indisposed. At this hour? Don't be silly, child." Emia knew that tone. Mrs. Peabody was 2 seconds from marching to the sheriff and reporting impropriety. I spilled a jar of raspberry preserves." Emia lied the first thing that came to her head. "It's a terrible mess. I can't possibly see anyone." There was a long, skeptical silence from the other side of the door. "Preserves, at 9 o'clock at night." I was recanning. Very well, but that hemline, Emia, it's vital. I'll be back first thing in the morning." "I'll be ready," Emia said, leaning her back against the door, her knees shaking. She heard the heavy tread of Mrs. Peabody retreating down the boardwalk. Emia let out a sob of pure relief, sliding down the door to the floor. She looked at the lump under the blanket. It was still. Too still. She scrambled over. "Mr. Ranger." She pulled back the blanket. His eyes were open. That icy blue stare was fixed on her, no longer delirious but sharp. He was weak, but he was present. He had heard everything. His eyes flicked to the bolted door, then to her blood-soaked hands, then to the needle and thread on the table. He licked his chapped, cracked lips. "Preserves," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. A small hysterical laugh escaped Emia. "You're Josiah Munro," she said, remembering the name from his delirium. "And I think you're a lot of trouble." Josiah Munro just stared at her, his gaze unreadable. He tried to sit up, but the effort was too much. He winced, his hand moving to his shoulder. "You," he rasped. "You stitched me." "I did," she said, her voice hardening. "Now, Josiah Munro, you have a choice. You can lie there, be quiet, and heal. Or you can talk, tear your stitches, and die. Either way, you're not to bleed on my lace." He stared at her for a long moment, a flicker of something, was it, respect, amusement, in his eyes. He closed his eyes. "Quiet. Quiet. Sounds good." And for the first time that night, Emia Gable believed he might actually live. The days that followed were a strange, silent truce. Josiah Munro was a ghost in her small home. Emia had dragged a cot from her back room into the main shop, hiding him behind a partition of dressmakers' dummies and bolts of fabric. During the day, he had to be utterly silent. He was a terrible patient. He was a man built for motion, for the wide-open plains, and being confined to a 3-by-6-foot cot in the back of a dress shop was, she suspected, a fresh kind of hell for him. He was also, Emia, learned a man of profound, unshakable silence. He would watch her. She would sit at her treadle machine, the thump, clack, a rhythm that governed her life, and she would feel his eyes on her back. He sat propped against the wall, his arm in a sling she'd fashioned from canvas. He never spoke. He just watched her fingers as she guided fabric-measured seams and made the tiny, invisible stitches that were her trademark. Their communication was one of necessity. In the morning before the town was awake, she would unbolt the door and check his bandages. She would bring him a bowl of thin broth or watery oatmeal. He would accept it with a curt nod. "Ma'am," he'd rumble, his voice still rough. She learned his habits. He cleaned his empty gun, the Remington he'd retrieved from his boot, with obsessive, repetitive motions. He would test the weight of it, his eyes far away. He tore a page from her catalogue and with a stub of pencil began writing. Names, dates, a map. When she got too close, he would cover it. His presence was a heavy, dangerous secret. Every knock on the door sent a jolt of panic through her. "Emia, dear," Mrs. Peabody said 2 days later, peering around the shop. "Are you quite well? You look peaked, and I must say it smells medicinal in here." Just a new brand of fabric, sizing Mrs. Peabody. Emia lied, her hands clammy. "From France? Smells like a distillery. Now the hem..." Emia's life, once small and predictable, was now a minefield. She had to buy more laudanum from the general store for his pain, earning a raised eyebrow from Mr. Henderson. "A toothache, Emia. A terrible one, sir." But the true threat was not the town gossip. It was Silas Vane. Silas Vane was the closest thing Creedwater Gulch had to an aristocrat. He owned the freight company, which meant he owned the town's lifeline. He was handsome in a slick, predatory way, with a waistcoat that was always immaculate and a smile that never reached his cold grey eyes. And he had decided that Emia Gable would be his wife. He saw her as a possession, another pretty thing for his collection. He would stop by her shop under the guise of checking on her or protecting her interests. His advances were polite, but they carried the weight of a threat. He arrived on the 4th day of Josiah's confinement. "Emiya, my dear," he said, stepping inside without knocking, his cologne instantly filling the space, overpowering the scent of blood and whiskey. Emiya jumped, nearly dropping a box of pins. Behind the partition she heard the whisper-soft click of a gun hammer being pulled back. "Mr. Vane," she said, forcing a smile. "You startled me. A busy woman like yourself should keep her door open." "Welcome's business," he said, his eyes roving. He didn't look at her. He looked at her shop, at her things. "I prefer the quiet," she said, stepping between him and the back room. His smile tightened. "You are an orphan, Emiya. This is a hard town for a woman alone. I have offered you my protection, my name. You are very kind, Mr. Vane, but I am managing. Are you?" His gaze drifted. He was sharp. He missed nothing. His eyes landed on the basin she'd used, which she hadn't yet emptied of the pinkish water. His eyes narrowed. "You've been busy," he said, his voice soft. "I'm mending a hunting coat," she stammered. "A deer." "A deer," he repeated. He took a step closer. "It's a curious thing, Emiya. A friend of mine, Mr. Henderson, mentioned you bought laudanum, a large bottle, and whiskey from the saloon, and bandages." Emiya's blood ran cold. I cut my hand badly," she said, holding up her hand, which was mercifully pricked and red from her sewing. Silas Vane smiled. He reached out, and before she could stop him, took her hand. He ran his thumb over her knuckles. It wasn't a caress. It was an act of ownership. Such delicate hands. You must protect them. Behind the screen, the silence from Josiah was so absolute it was a physical force. "Let me go, Mr. Vane," she said, pulling her hand back. His eyes turned to steel. "I heard a rumor," he said, conversational, "that a certain U.S. Ranger, a man named Monroe, was seen riding into these hills. He's been asking questions, stirring up trouble for business associates of mine." Emiya held her breath. "He was last seen taking a significant amount of lead." Vane continued adjusting his cuffs. "Funny thing, he just vanished. The men looking for him are very, very eager to find him. There's a bounty, you see." He looked at her, his gaze penetrating. A man like that. He'd be desperate. He might even force a kind, lonely woman to hide him. I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. "I hope you don't." He walked to the door. "Because if I found out someone in my town was harboring a fugitive, I'd have to take it personally, and I always collect what's mine, Emiya. Always." He tipped his hat and was gone. Emiya sagged against her workbench, her body trembling. A moment later, Josiah Monroe stepped out from behind the screen. His face was pale, drawn with pain, but his eyes were chips of blue granite. He was holding his Remington. "He's the one," Josiah said, his voice a low growl. What one?" "The one who supplies the Blackwood gang. Silas Vane." He looked at her, his gaze assessing. "He wants you. He's a pest. He's a snake, Mom. And he just told you, plain as day, that he's going to find out your secret." He looked at the bolted door. "I've brought you a storm, Miss Gable. You should have let me die on your floor." "I don't let people die on my floor," Emiya said, her voice shaking but stubborn. "It's bad for the finish." He looked at her, and the smallest, faintest hint of a smile touched his lips. It vanished as quickly as it came. "He'll be back," Josiah said, "and when he does, he won't be alone." "What do we do?" she asked. Josiah Monroe checked the cylinder of his revolver. He asked as if the concept were foreign. He looked at his bandaged shoulder, then at her. You keep sewing, and I try to heal. Fast. For 3 more days, the shop was a fortress of silent tension. Emia worked her fingers, flying her ears, trained on the sound of every footstep on the boardwalk outside. Josiah healed his silence, amplifying the threat. He began to move more, testing his wounded shoulder, his face a mask of pain he refused to acknowledge. The barrier between them, the wall of his silence, was beginning to feel as threatening as Silas Vane. He was a danger she had allowed into her home, and she knew nothing about him, save for a name whispered in fever. The break came on the 7th night. Emia was exhausted. She had finished the sterling wedding dress, a triumph of lace and silk, and her eyes burned. She'd made a simple stew, more water than rabbit, but it was hot. She ladled a bowl for herself, and as she had every night one for him. She pushed back the partition. He wasn't on the cot. Her heart leapt into her throat. She found him by the back window, staring out at the sliver of moon over the mountains. He was dressed in his own clothes, which she had washed and mended. The bullet hole in his shirt was now a neat star-patterned darn. "You should be resting," she said, her voice sharp with fear. "I've rested," he replied, not turning. "You'll tear your stitches." "They're good stitches, Mum." He finally turned. In the moonlight, his face was all angles and shadows. "You're a fine seamstress." "It's what I do," she said, holding out the bowl. "Mending things." He looked at the bowl, then at her. He took it. "You should have turned me over to Vane." "Why?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Because he has a bounty." "Because he's right. I'm trouble." "You said that." She sat on a stool, her own bowl of stew untouched. "You've been here 7 days, Ranger. You haven't said 7 words. You owe me an explanation. Who are you, Josiah Monroe, and who is Anna?" His reaction was immediate and violent. His hand tightened on the bowl so hard his knuckles turned white. The spoon clattered. "Don't," he whispered, his voice lethal. "Don't you say her name." "You said it." Emia pressed, a strange boldness rising in her. "You were fevered. You said it was your fault." He turned on her, his good arm slamming the bowl onto the table, stew splashing. His eyes were blazing. "You don't know anything." "Then tell me," she cried, standing up, finally angry. "I have risked everything for you. I have lied to my neighbors. I have drawn the attention of Silas Vane, who owns this town. I am hiding a man who brings gunmen and death to my doorstep. I have a right to know why." He stared at her, his chest heaving. The silence stretched taut and vibrating. He looked beaten, not by Vane, not by the bullet, but by her words. He sank onto the cot, his face buried in his one good hand. "She was my wife," he said, his voice muffled. Emia sat back down, her anger evaporating, replaced by a cold dread. "Her name was Anna." Josiah continued, his voice hollow. "And our boy, Samuel. He was 4. He had his mother's eyes." He looked up, and the man she saw was not the hard, cold ranger. He was just a man, a broken one. I wasn't a ranger then. I was a farmer, in Texas. We had a small plot, just a little thing. But it was ours. I was happy. He said the word happy like a foreign curse. The Blackwood gang, Ethan Thorne. They weren't anybody then, just river rats. They came through wanting horses. I told them no. I was stubborn, proud. He choked on the words. I was in the barn. I heard Anna scream. By the time I got to the house was on fire. Thorne, he was just watching it burn, smirking. He shot me, left me for dead in the dirt. But I didn't die. I crawled. I buried them. What was left of them? He rubbed his face, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. I've been hunting him ever since. Became a ranger just to get the authority. I've been chasing him for 3 years. From Texas to Kansas now to Colorado. I got close 2 weeks ago. Too close. They ambushed me. I rode for 3 days bleeding before I fell through your door. He looked at her, his eyes empty. Silas Vane. He's their man here. He fences their gold, their horses. He's the one who gets them supplies. He's the respectable face on their whole operation. I was here to prove it, to get the last piece. And I failed. The shop was silent, save for the ticking of Emia's mantel clock. So now you know, Miss Gable, he said, standing up. I'm not a lawman. I'm a ghost. And I'm fueled by nothing but hate. I've brought my war to your front door. Emia looked at her own hands, pricked and calloused. She thought of her own parents, buried on a trail she couldn't even find. She thought of her aunt, who had worked herself to death. We all have ghosts, Mr. Monroe, she said quietly. Mine are just quieter. She stood and walked over to him. He tensed, as if she might strike him. She reached up, not to his face, but to the collar of his mended shirt, which was crooked. She straightened it, her fingers brushing the warm skin of his neck. He stopped breathing. It was the first time she had touched him, outside of mending his wound. It was a simple, human gesture. I was orphaned on the trail. She said, her voice soft but steady. My aunt taught me to sew. She said the world will always try to tear you apart. The only thing that matters is how you put yourself back together. Your stitches. He looked down at her, his icy blue eyes searching her face. He saw no pity, only a strength that matched his own. You're not a ghost, Josiah, she said. You're just badly torn. You're mending. He didn't know what to do. He was a man of action, of violence and revenge. He had not been shown simple, uncomplicated kindness in 3 years. He slowly raised his good hand, hesitating, and touched her face. Just a light brush of his rough fingers against her cheek. Emia, he whispered, her given name. A single gunshot shattered the night. It wasn't aimed at them. It came from the street. It was followed by a volley of gunfire, shouts, the roar of the saloon dying, replaced by the screams of men. Josiah was across the room in a second, pushing Emia to the floor and dousing the lamp. He peered through the slit in the curtain. He's here, Josiah growled. Who Vane? No, Vane wouldn't be this loud. He turned to her, his face a grim shadow in the darkness. Ethan Thorne, the Blackwood gang has come to town. The gunfire was a rabid dog unleashed. Creedwater Gulch, usually quiet by midnight, was a symphony of chaos. Stay down, Josiah commanded, pushing Emia behind her thickest workbench, the one made of solid oak. He crouched by the window, his Remington steady in his good hand, a box of cartridges from his saddlebag, which Emia had salvaged in his pocket. They're not shooting at us. Emia whispered, her voice trembling. They're at the saloon. It's a greeting, Josiah said, his voice grim. Thorne likes to make an entrance. He's announcing he owns the place. He's likely here to meet Vane, get his money and resupply. But Vane knows you're here, or he suspects. Vane won't tell him. Josiah's eyes scanned the street. Not yet. Vane's a businessman. Thorne is a rabid animal. Vane will want to handle me himself, quiet-like. Get the bounty. He won't want Thorne tearing his town apart and drawing the attention of the U.S. Marshals. The shooting subsided, replaced by the booming, drunken laughter of men who had just taken what they wanted. They've taken the saloon, Josiah observed. They'll drink, they'll... He stopped. He didn't want to finish the thought. Then they'll see Vane. What do we do? Emir asked. She was terrified, but she was also furious. This was her shop, her town. We wait. The wait was agonizing. For an hour, the only sounds were the raucous celebration from the saloon. Then a single set of footsteps approached the shop. Heavy, confident. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't old Mrs. Peabody this time. Emir looked at Josiah. He shook his head, pressing a finger to his lips. Emir. Silas Vane's voice cut through the door. It was no longer smooth or polite. It was ragged with urgency. Emir, I know you're in there. Open this door. It's a matter of life and death. Josiah and Emir exchanged a look. He's alone, Josiah whispered, but his timing is too good. Emir, damn it, open the door. Ethan Thorne is in town. He's unpredictable. You're not safe. He's trying to flush me out, Josiah murmured. To confirm I'm here, or Emir whispered back. He's genuinely afraid of Thorne. Their partners, Josiah dismissed. Emir. Vane sounded desperate now. He jiggled the handle. Please, I need to. The decision was taken from them. Another voice joined Vane on the boardwalk. A new voice. It was slow with a deadly pleasant drawl. Well now, Silas, who are you calling on at this hour seems impolite. Emir saw Silas Vane's shadow freeze through the curtain. Ethan. Vane said, his voice, a strained, false hearty. I was just checking on the neighbors. This is the seamstress's shop, a poor orphan woman. Making sure she's not what... The new voice, Ethan Thorne's, was closer now. Making sure she's not harboring anyone. You seem awful nervous, Silas. I ride all this way, and you're not at the saloon to greet me. You're not at your office. You're here knocking on a seamstress's door in the middle of the night. I told you, Vane said. I'm just... You told me, Thorne interrupted, his voice turning to gravel, that you had this town handled. You told me the supply line was secure, and I find out not from you but from one of my own scouts that the ranger, who's been on my tail for 3 years, Josiah Monroe, was seen riding into these hills. And then he vanishes. There was a heavy, sickening silence. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Silas? Thorne asked. Ethan, I swear, I've been looking. I had my suspicions. Suspicions, Thorne roared. A heavy thud made the door rattle. Vane had been shoved against it. You've been sitting on him, haven't you? Waiting for me to leave so you could take him in yourself? Collect that bounty. You're a greedy little pig. Silas. No, Ethan. Please, he's in there. I know he is. Vane was screaming now, all pretense gone. Monroe, I know you're in there. He'll kill us both. Tell him you're in here. Inside the shop, Josiah's face was stone. He looked at Emir. This was it. This ain't your fight, Emir, he whispered, checking his gun. The back door. Go. Run to the hills. Don't stop. Emir looked at the back door. Then she looked at the front door, where Silas Vane was pleading for his life. Then she looked at Josiah, his one good arm against his wounded shoulder. He was in no shape for this. She walked past him. Emir, what are you? She walked to the front door, her head held high. They're coming in anyway, she said, her voice shaking but clear. They'll burn the shop. This is my home. I'm not running. That's a death sentence, he hissed. Then we die. She looked at him. But we are not badly torn. We are mending. Remember. Before he could stop her, she reached for the bolt. Emir, no. She drew the heavy iron bolt back. The door swung open. Emir Gable stood face to face with Silas Vane and the devil himself. Silas Vane was on his knees, his immaculate suit ruined. A large, grinning man held a shotgun to his head. The man in the center, Clearly the leader was Ethan Thorne. He was not what Emiah expected. He was handsome with dark curly hair and a charming smile. He wore a fine silk vest, crimson red. He looked more like a gambler than a killer. He was slowly pulling on a pair of black leather gloves. He looked at Emiah, his smile widening. Well, hello. The brave little seamstress. His eyes flicked past her into the darkness of the shop. Josiah. Thorne called out, his voice pleasant. It's been a long time. Come on out. You're being rude to the lady. Josiah Munro stepped out from the shadows, his Remington aimed steady at Thorne's heart. Thorne. Josiah said, his voice pure venom. Thorne chuckled. Look at you, half dead, and shacked up with a needle pusher. He tusked. You've fallen far. Let her go, Thorne, Josiah growled. This is between me and you. Oh, it's always been between me and you, sire, Thorne said. But you see, you took something from me. My freedom, my reputation. You've been a thorn in my side. He laughed at his own joke. So I'm going to take everything from you. Again. He nodded to the man holding the gun on Vane. Silas here. He failed me. He was supposed to have you gift-wrapped. Instead, he let you heal. Ethan, please, Vane begged. I can fix this. I have your money. Money? Thorne looked at Vane with almost pity. Silas, you think I'm here for money? He looked back at Josiah. He's here. That's the payment. And you? He turned to Vane. You're the interest. No. Vane screamed. Thorne drew his pistol, a nickel-plated Colt in a blur of motion, and shot Silas Vane in the chest. Vane collapsed onto the boardwalk, his eyes wide with shock staring at Emiah. He died at her feet. Emiah screamed. Now then, Thorne said, holstering his gun and wiping his gloves. As I was saying, this is between me and you. He nodded to his men who fanned out, guns raised. But she's going to watch. The world compressed to the 20-foot space between the door and the back wall. Thorne's men, 4 of them, hard-bitten and smelling of whiskey, started to move into the shop. Emiah, get back, Josiah roared. He fired his Remington. The sound in the small shop was deafening. One of Thorne's men cried out, clutching his arm, and stumbled back onto the street. Get him! Thorne bellowed, diving behind a rain barrel on the boardwalk. Gunfire exploded. The front of Emiah's shop dissolved into a spray of splintered wood and shattered glass. Her dressmaker's dummies, her silent partners, were ripped apart by bullets. The Brussels lace wedding dress, hanging in the corner, was torn from its hook, a puff of white in the chaos. Josiah grabbed Emiah by the waist and threw them both behind the heavy oak workbench. Bullets thudded into the wood, a relentless, deafening drumbeat. The back door, go! Josiah yelled over the din, reloading his revolver with frantic, one-handed speed. I can't, there. They're outside, too. Emiah had seen a shadow move past the back window. They were surrounded. This was a siege. Damn it! Josiah winced, his wounded shoulder, screaming in protest. He was weak. He fired twice more blindly over the bench. I need time! He panted, sweat and blood dripping into his eyes. Time, Emiah repeated. She looked around her ruined shop. Her eyes frantic landed on her tools, not her shears. Something else. The kerosene, she whispered. What, the kerosene for the lamps? She pointed to a large tin under her work table. Josiah saw it. A desperate, terrible idea formed. They'll burn us alive, he said. They'll kill us anyway, she cried. Get ready to move to the back room. She grabbed the tin. It was half full, heavy. She uncapped the spout. Cover me! Josiah stood firing his last 3 shots, forcing the men on the boardwalk to take cover. Emiah now. With a scream of pure primal rage, Emiya hurled the contents of the tin out the shattered front window. The kerosene doused the boardwalk, splashing onto the two men, taking cover there, splashing onto the dead body of Silas Vane. "Fire!" one of the men yelled, smelling the fuel. "She's Josiah!" Emiya screamed. Josiah understood. He raised his Remington, took careful aim at the kerosene lamp that was still hanging miraculously by the door, and fired. The bullet struck the brass base. The lamp exploded, raining fire onto the kerosene-soaked boardwalk. It was an inferno. The men on the boardwalk went up like human torches. Their screams were inhuman, cutting through the night. The front of her shop was a wall of flame. "To the back!" Josiah yelled, grabbing her. They crashed into her small living quarters as the fire began to eat at the shop. The smoke was thick and black, but Thorn was not on the boardwalk. He was still out there. "Well played, Ranger." Thorn's voice called calm and cold from the alleyway beside the shop. You've barbecued my men, and your lady friend. She's got spirit. I'll enjoy breaking her." "Come and try it, Thorn." Josiah yelled, his voice a ragged cough. "Oh, I will." A crash of glass came from the back of the shop, the alley window. "He's coming in," Josiah said. He was down to his last few bullets. His arm was shaking, the wound certainly torn open. He was done. "No," Emiya said. She looked at her small, neat room, the cot, the stove, the heavy iron-bound trunk at the foot of her bed where she kept her winter blankets, and her shears. "Josiah," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "Distract him." "What?" "Just talk. Ask him about Anna. Make him angry." She picked up her heaviest tailor's shears. They were a foot-long, cold steel. Josiah understood. He leaned against the wall, his gun aimed at the door to the burning shop. "Why Thorn?" Josiah called out, his voice laced with a genuine, agonizing pain. "Why Anna? She was a farmer's wife. She was nothing to you." The sounds of movement in the alley stopped. "Anna!" Thorn's voice was closer. He was at the back window. "Oh, Anna, you're still on about that. She was loud, screamed a lot, just like your boy." Josiah roared inarticulately, a sound of pure grief, and fired his gun into the wall. It was a mistake, a waste of a bullet. "That's it," Thorn laughed. "You're empty, Josiah. You're empty." The back window shattered. Ethan Thorn, silhouetted against the fire from the front, climbed through. He was a dark, laughing demon. He saw Josiah leaning against the far wall, his gun hand empty. "Gotcha!" Thorn smiled, raising his nickel-plated Colt. He never saw Emiya. She had hidden in the deepest shadow beside the door. As he stepped in, as his attention was locked on his nemesis, Emiya stepped out. She held the shears like a dagger, both hands, and plunged them with all her strength into Ethan Thorn's back, right below the ribs where she knew a vital organ would be. Thorn stopped. He looked down, confused. He tried to turn. He saw her. His handsome face was a mask of pure, childlike surprise. "A needle. Push her," he gurgled. He fired his gun, a reflexive spasm. The bullet went into the ceiling. Then he collapsed, the shears still buried in him. He was dead before he hit the floor. The shop was silent. The only sound was the crackle of the fire in the front room and the ragged, desperate breathing of two survivors. Josiah Monroe slid down the wall, his empty gun clattering to the floor. He looked at Emiya. She was covered in soot, her hair wild, her hands stained with blood. His veins, thorns. She was still holding the shears. She dropped them. They hit the floor with a heavy clang. And then the orphan seamstress who mended clothes and the broken ranger who had been mended by her fell into each other's arms as the roof of the shop began to catch fire. The fire didn't take the whole building. The townspeople roused by the gunfire, and flames formed a bucket brigade. They had all been cowering in their homes, but the sight of Emiah Gable's shop, the orphan's shop burning, was a shame they couldn't bear. They put it out, saving her back room and the skeleton of her store. The aftermath was a blur. The town sheriff, a man named Brody, who had been conveniently pinned down in his office, finally emerged. He found a scene of carnage. Silas Vane, the town's most prominent citizen, dead on the boardwalk. Ethan Thorne, one of the most wanted men in the territory, dead in the back room, killed with a pair of sewing shears. 2 other bodies burned beyond recognition, and in the middle of it all, Emiah Gable and Josiah Monroe, leaning against each other covered in soot and blood. The town, which had seen Emiah as a quiet mouse, now looked at her with a mixture of awe and terror. Mrs. Peabody, for one, was speechless, clutching her pearls. Josiah, despite his protests, was taken to the town doctor. His stitches were torn, the wound infected. Emiah, refusing all help, simply sat on her porch, the only part of the front left, and watched the sunrise, a blanket wrapped around her. She had saved her home. She had killed a man. She didn't know which fact was more terrifying. Josiah's healing took another 2 weeks. This time he healed in the town doctor's sparse guest room, with the whole town watching. He was a hero. The man who had, with the help of the Angel of Creedwater, as the local paper would later call her, broken the Blackwood gang. Emiah. Emiah was a pariah in a new way. No longer invisible she was now. Formidable. People were too polite. They offered to help rebuild her shop, their offers clumsy, their eyes full of questions she couldn't answer. Josiah had to leave. The U.S. Marshal from Denver, summoned by telegraph, arrived to take custody of the idea of the Blackwood gang, as the men were dead, and to take Josiah's official statement. The day he left, the first snow of winter was dusting the peaks. He found her in the ruined shell of her shop. She was sweeping, always cleaning, always mending. "Emiah," he said. She turned. He was wearing a new duster, courtesy of the town council. His arm was in a proper sling. He looked whole. "Ranger," she said, her voice quiet. He walked up to her, his boots crunching on charred wood. He didn't know what to say. "Thank you," felt too small. "I'm sorry," felt like a lie. "I have to go," he said. "The marshal needs a full report. I have to finish this. The paperwork. The aftermath." "I know." She looked down at her broom. "You're going to hunt the rest of them, the ones who got away." He hesitated. "That's what I do." "It's not," she said, looking up, her eyes clear. "It's what you did. You're not a ghost, Josiah. You're a man. You're mended." He reached out his good hand and touched the soot stain on her cheek. You saved my life, Emiah." "We saved each other's," she corrected. He struggled. The words were hard for him. "Emiah, what I said about Anna. I can't. I know," she interrupted gently. "You don't have to be sorry for loving her, or for grieving her." He looked at her. His heart, a thing he thought long dead, ached. "Wait for me," he breathed. Emiah, who had waited her whole life for parents who never returned for a life that never started, shook her head. "No," she said. His face fell. "I won't wait, Josiah," she said, her voice strong. "I will live. I'm going to rebuild this shop. I'm going to order new lace. I'm going to make the finest dresses in this territory. I'm not the girl who hides. Not anymore." She smiled a small, sad smile. "You go. You finish your war. Finish it for good. Stop being the ghost. And then you'll know where to find me." He understood. She was giving him a choice, not an obligation, a destination. He nodded, his throat too thick to speak. He leaned in, his first and only true gesture of affection, and kissed her on the forehead. Then Josiah, Hawk Monroe, the ranger who had been broken, turned and walked away. Winter set in. It was the hardest winter Creedwater had seen in a decade. The snow piled high, Emir rebuilt. With the help of the town, who were now fiercely protectively proud of her, her shop was rebuilt stronger than before. Gable's Fine Tailoring, the new sign read. Not just mending. She was no longer an orphan. She was Miss Gable. She worked. She saved. She built a small, sturdy life. But every evening when the wind howled, she would look out the window. She wasn't waiting. She was living. But the silence in the shop was once again profound. The winter broke, turning the streets of Creedwater to a muddy soup. The thaw was a promise. Emir Gable's shop stood stronger than before, the new sign reading, Gable's Fine Tailoring. She was no longer just mending. She was creating. Her business was booming, and she was hanging a help wanted sign when he arrived. A rider came into town. He wasn't a marshal or a cowboy. He was clean-shaven, wore a good hat, and rode a strong black stallion. He was leading a second horse, a beautiful bay mare with a new side saddle. The entire town went silent. Mrs. Peabody, her hand on the general store's door, froze. Emir, hammer in hand, stopped. The rider dismounted in front of her shop. He was not the broken, bleeding thing who had collapsed on her floor. He was not the vengeful ghost. He was Josiah Monroe, whole and healed. He took off his hat, his ice-blue eyes warm. "Mom," he said, his voice a clear, warm baritone. "Ranger," she replied, her heart a drum against her ribs. "Shop looks new," he said, admiring the sign. "It's a good name. It's a good shop. I finished the paperwork," he said, moving to the boardwalk. "The last of Thorne's men were rounded up. I'm glad to hear it." The silence stretched, but it was a comfortable one. "I resigned my commission," he said. Emir's hand tightened on the hammer. "Oh, U.S. Marshals offered me a desk job in Denver. I told them no." He was close now, and she could smell the leather and the open air on him. "I'm not a ranger anymore. I'm just a man, and I'm not much of a hand at words, Emir." He reached into his vest pocket. He pulled out a small, simple silver ring. "But I know a good stitch when I see one," he said, his voice thick. I'm still a bit torn, Emir. And I figure I'll need a lifetime of mending." He held out the ring. "I sold my land in Texas. I used it to buy that mare. She's got a gentle spirit. And this." Tears welled in Emir's eyes. The next spring he came with a ring and a horse. She whispered a thought she'd kept all winter. "Emir Gable," Josiah Monroe said, his voice breaking. "You mended my body, and you mended my soul. Will you have me? Will you build a life with me?" Emir looked at the ring, the mare, and the man. She dropped the hammer. It clattered on the boardwalk. She took the ring. "What took you so long, Josiah?" She smiled. He smiled back, a real, true smile. And in front of the entire town of Creedwater Gulch, he pulled her in and kissed her a kiss not of mending, but of building. And that's the story of the Orphan Seamstress and the Ranger. It proves that even in the dust and blood of the Wild West, the strongest things aren't anger or revenge. They're the threads that mend us. They say Sheriff Monroe and his wife, Emiah, built a new life stitch by stitch. If this story mended a piece of your heart today, we'd be so grateful if you'd like this video. It tells us we're on the right track. Share it with someone who loves a good story of survival and love. And finally, If you want more stories from the wild frontier with all the drama heart and twists of real life, please subscribe to our channel. It costs you nothing, but it means the world to us. Until next time, stay brave.